Good evening, dear friends, and welcome. I'm Victoria Jean Rollins, co-chair of the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Task Force of the Episcopal Diocese of New York, alongside the Reverend Paul Fierstein. Tonight's gathering, Sexual Assault from Cradle to Grave, a call to healing justice across generations, faiths, and genders, marks the first event in our three-part series entitled Finding Hope in Uncertain Times. It is humbling and deeply moving for our task force to witness how far our work is reaching. This moment is a testament to the power of collective care and shared purpose. Before we begin, we are honored to have the support of our diocesan bishop, Bishop Hyde, and Bishop Glasspool and Bishop Shin. We're also blessed with an extraordinary group of panelists and a gifted moderator tonight, individuals whose insights, compassion, and lived experiences offer light and direction in this vital conversation. As we are equally moved by the incredible response to tonight's event, with more than 122 people registered, your presence reflects a growing commitment to addressing interpersonal violence in all its forms. Thank you. Whether you are here tonight as an activist, an advocate, a contemplative, or some combination of the three, I believe you are here for a reason. Together, we have the potential to make the world a more just, compassionate, and healing place. In many faith traditions, we are called to practice love and kindness. In the Buddhist tradition, it is metta, loving kindness. In Islam, it is compassion through action. In Judaism, it is tikkun olam, the call to repair the world. For many Christians, it is the commandment to love God and love one another. These traditions remind us that healing justice is not only possible for everyone, it is sacred. But we must also ask, where does violence against one another begin? Judeo-Christian scripture looks to the book of Genesis, the story of Cain and Abel, and even earlier, to emotional abuse and blame shifting between Adam, Eve, and that serpent. Our scriptures and traditions, like our clinicians and secular leaders, speak to the choices we make each and every day to deny, to excuse, to ignore, or to stand up against harm. These are not just moral choices, they are deeply human ones. I share this not as a theologian alone, but as a survivor. I too have lived through sexual assault and domestic violence across the span of my life. It has been a journey marked by pain, injury, loss of home, relationships, employment, and at times, even the will to live. I have known isolation. I have known fear. Through the danger, by grace yet, I am here, and so are many others walking their own paths of healing, just as I have and still am. You may not know their survivors, but they're walking right beside you, and if they trust you, they will tell you. To those of us still in the valley of the shadow, my heart goes out to you. You are not alone. If you are in danger or if you are healing, please reach out to us or to someone you trust. There are people willing to be there for you. You cannot do it alone. You need people to empower you, but not to blame you or not to challenge you. We will not tell you what to do. We will listen, walk with you, and honor your own wisdom in your own life. Some of you tonight may be clinicians or practitioners eager to learn and share, or people simply curious about the roots and intersections of interpersonal violence. You are all welcome here. Others may be what I like to call honorary first responders, people who hold space, who witness suffering, and who offer presence. If that's you, thank you. I hope you'll consider attending our workshops or trainings that we can recommend from other agencies as well to deepen your role in this vital work together. Moments and movements can be engendered because people have done just that, standing beside a victim, crying out for them, taking a video. Think of that power. It's a sacred beginning, what we're doing tonight. And we never know where spirit might lead when we gather with open minds and hearts as we carry on in our lives. I want to express my deep gratitude to our panelists, Maureen, to Shannon, to Manuel, and Patty, for your life-giving, life-changing work and witness in the world. Thank you. As a theologian, I would also invite us to reflect on the broader connections between interpersonal violence and what many in the global faith community call the rape of the earth. That is, the violence done to our planet and all living things. These struggles are deeply intertwined alongside interracial tensions, violence, degradation, and othering. And now it is my great honor to introduce a friend and someone who continues to inspire me. It's Patty Krog. Patty is an Anishinaabe Ukrainian writer and speaker from the Luxel First Nation in Treaty Territory 3, and as a resident of Niagara Falls, Ontario. She is our neighbor. As many of you on this call are beyond the United States. Welcome. You may not know Patty from her incredible contributions to the book So That We and Our Children May Live, co-authored with Sarah Augustine and Sherry Hostetler. But this is a book with a courageous reflection on climate, kinship, and collective action, which Patty will talk about as well tonight. She brings a powerful invitation to truth-telling and shared responsibility. Patty reminds us that healing is possible when we practice kinship, when we turn together towards the whole truth, and when we commit to doing better together. With deep respect and gratitude, I give you Patty Krog.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. And yes, there's actually going to be a discussion with Sarah. I wrote the foreword to that book, and I was very flattered and honored to be asked to do that. But we're actually going to be doing a panel next week, so I will later on. I will put a link, or where you can get some more information on that in case you do want to hear Sarah Augustine. I listened to a webinar of hers, gosh, a few years ago now, and she made a remark that when the settlers first came here, when the earliest colonists first came here, they came full of good news. We have good news for you. We have good news for you. But they never asked us if we had good news for them. And wow, did that phrase stay with me. I bought her book. I reached out to her, and now, because that's the kind of person I am. If you write a book and I'm really moved by it, I will find you. So yes, so my name is Patty Krawick. Wabna Nanangonkwe is what my father called me. My paternal family is Ojibwe Anishinaabe. My maternal family, so my dad's family is Ojibwe Anishinaabe. from the Lac Seul area. So you go to Thunder Bay, turn right, drive about another 4 hours, and that's where we are. We're way, way north. My maternal family is German Ukrainian, and they refugeed into Canada. My grandmother and grandfather actually both refugeed from Stalin to Hitler. My grandmother arriving in Germany during the Third Reich, really, and and so that's something that I actually think about quite a lot, particularly right now, as kind of America and wherever you guys go, we follow. I don't know why Canada does this, but wherever the United States goes, Canada follows, and and so we're watching kind of this descent into fascism and into a really terrible authoritarian state. And my grandmother's legacy reminds me that there are people who will be safe in that world. She was safe in Hitler's Germany. She was not safe under Stalin, but she was safe in Hitler's Germany because she was German. And that reminds me that there will always be people for whom the things we are talking about tonight are not an issue. Race is not an issue. Religion is not an issue. Sexual violence, if they experience it, is taken seriously. Their perpetrators are looked for. So I'm mindful of that now, when I speak about decolonization and about, settler colonialism, that like my maternal grandmother, there are people who will be safe in this world that is being created. And they're not going to join with us on any of these fights. And I don't know what to do with that. And so if anybody else does have any ideas of what to do, how to reach these people and make them care, I don't know. I keep Palestine behind me all the time when I talk to bring Palestine up, because if we can't build care for a genocide that's being live streamed on our phone, I don't know how we can make people care about the harms that they can't see, that don't affect them, that they're not willing to look at. I entered the field of social work first by volunteering and then by working at a sexual assault center, which to me is always kind of a weird name, but that's what it was called. It's called a sexual assault center, working with victims in the immediate aftermath of a sexual assault. After 4 years, I shifted to child protection, and then I retired 16 years later. And in 20 years of working with victims of sexual violence, I can confirm that it really does go from cradle to grave. And it happens in myriad ways. I have listened to adults talk about a pattern of sexual violence beginning in early childhood that they never talked about, as well as children made courageous by the adults who took them seriously. I reviewed history, our own history, with families that contained documentation about children disclosing abuse that weren't taken seriously, only to find decades later that they had been telling the truth. In my books, Becoming Kin and the upcoming Bad Indians book club, I look at how colonization itself and the imposition of a European way of thinking in the world laid the foundations for generations of loss and sexual violence. Each of these panelists, including myself, will have about 10 minutes to talk about themselves and their work. I have some questions that will hopefully tie their work together, and then there will be about 10 minutes for questions from you, the audience. Please put those questions into the chat. They will be provided to us by our hosts so that we can get right to them. And please remember to take care of yourself this evening, however that will look for you. We are not meant to experience trauma alone, but in community with each other. On Zoom, this is really hard. We're listening and participating alone. And I really hope that you have somebody to debrief with you if that's what you need afterwards. What age were you when you realized that an adult was looking at you sexually? This does not mean, of course, that's when they began to see you in a particular way. I want you to think about how old you were when you became aware of it. Today's discussion is about that gaze and the consequences of it for all of us. And although we will strive to avoid gendered language, the reality is that the vast majority of those who experience sexual violence are women and non-gender conforming people. We're going to hear about gender and race. To some, they might find themselves feeling a little defensive. I want you to sit in that discomfort, understanding that these things don't exist in boundaried ways as if everyone in all the groups were the same. Few of us exist in that purely racialized way. Most of us kind of live in those in-between spaces. Like, I'm father is Ojibwe, my mother is German. I'm a little darker skinned all year round, but I also live in an area with a lot of Italian people. And so people make that assumption about me. The way we're seen by others doesn't always reflect how we see ourselves. But for those who are racialized negatively, because we're all racialized in some way, right? So for those who are racialized negatively, we're burdened with that single story that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie so eloquently described. There are 1,000 stories told about white people, but only one told about each of us. And so we have to think about that in the context. So if you hear talk about, being a man or being white, and that makes you feel uncomfortable, I just want you to kind of sit with that and understand kind of the perspectives that we're bringing as we talk about this. Because it's not a violence that falls strictly along racial lines. It happens broadly across all communities. But the responses to that violence too often do fall along racial lines. And those who are marginalized by race or gender expression do experience higher rates of violence. Ruth Wilson Gilmore has a definition of racism that is very useful for us. In her book, Golden Gulag, she writes that racism, specifically, is the state-sanctioned or extra-legal production and exploitation of group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. Sorry, I got a spam call on my phone and it distracted me. In my work with the Sexual Assault Center, I was taught that sexual violence is, psychologically speaking, a trauma on par with murder itself. It is a kind of death all along the spectrum of experiences from the gaze itself to the most horrific incident. And as such, it is worth examining in the context of that state sanctioning and exploitation of group differentiated vulnerability to sexual violence. It's present in the way that members of these groups are seen and made vulnerable, put at risk. It's present in the ways that we're criminalized and then subjected to the almost daily sexual violence of strip searches. Imagine, if you will, the traumatic connections created by strip searching before and after a visit with your family. It is from my lens as an Anishinaabekwe, a deeply colonial violence that exerts control over all of us here in the so-called Americas as well as globally. Roughly 85% of the world has been colonized by Europe and European ideas about gender and race and who is permitted to use violence. This created particular kinds of womanhood and masculinity that are racialized as much as they're gendered. White girls are seen as filled with potential and needing protection. Black girls are fast, and Native girls go missing. White men are simultaneously courageous in their defense of white woman and girlhood, but also easily seduced by sexually aggressive Black women, while Black and Native men are seen as predators. We hear this in the way that people talk about migrants from exploited places. They are rapists and they are rapists, but migrants from European or Nordic countries are skilled labor. We hear it in the accusations of sexual violence against Palestinian resistance, but the admitted sexual violence of the Israeli Defense Forces is ignored or dismissed. Finally, anyone whose gender expression is seen as in any way transgressive of the boundaries laid down by those with the power to create and maintain such boundaries are subject to punishment and exclusion, something becoming evident in US and UK legislation and policies regarding biological gender, despite biologists themselves telling us there isn't any such thing. We all know the story of Emmett Till and the ways in which these things are weaponized into accusations of sexual assault. Returning to my question at the beginning, when white women assume the intentions of a Black man, they are able to mobilize that gaze alone to lynch the accused and burn down an entire community. But when we, using the statistics of sexual violence as well as our own experiences, point out the same gaze, it's the same gaze from white men, we are dismissed, accused of trying to ruin a good man. And of course, we cannot help but internalize these messages about us. They're everywhere and carry the weight of truth, even if we know it is a constructed truth made for a purpose. And so it is with great interest that I turn over to our panel and the expertise that they're going to bring to this conversation. First, we're going to hear from DeShannon. Aya Rev DeShannon Barnes-Bowens is a spiritual psychotherapist and professional development trainer who focuses on sexuality, vicarious trauma, sustainable self-care, and spiritual injury. In 2001, she began practicing Ifa Orisa spirituality and was initiated as a priestess in 2006. Aya DeShannon was ordained as an interfaith minister at One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in 2010. She later served as a seminary co-director, ordaining 130 ministers during her tenure. It's quite a legacy. She is the author of Hush Hush, An African-American Family Breaks Their Silence on Sexuality and Sexual Abuse, came out in 2007 and reissued in 2015. And we'll put DeShannon's web address in the chat. So over to you, DeShannon.
Thank you, Patty. And thank you everyone for being here with us for this very important topic. And before I turn over the slides that I'm going to show, just some musings for us, I'd like to share with you how I actually got into this work. It was reading a book. Books matter. Despite, what they're saying in the news, the book that motivated me was Push by Sapphire. And I was so shaken by that book that I decided that when I was going to pursue more learning in college, particularly graduate school, that I wanted to specialize in learning more about sexual abuse, particularly within African American communities, because it was something that I wasn't hearing people talk about, and especially abuse that happens within families. And I've written about this and spoken about this, all over the country in different countries, but I always have to locate that experience in the way that it felt in my body to read that book, the tears that I shed that fell on the page, and the resolve within myself to want to be part of the solution by raising awareness and teaching people different ways and how to look at sexuality once I realized that that was a missing piece. So that's how I entered this work, a commitment and a resolve to lift up the sacredness of who we are. And so in that spirit, I want to acknowledge my ancestors. I am the daughter of Ernest Cole Bowens, who is an ancestor Ibae. I want to acknowledge my grandparents. I want to acknowledge the indigenous ancestors of the land where I was born in Quincy, Illinois, and the land that I live now in Essex County, New Jersey, and pay homage to all of the ancestors who are gone before their time, who were victims of sexual assault, sexual molestation, and those who took their lives due to sexual harassment and not being heard and taken seriously. So now I'm going to share a few words just to offer some thoughts and spiritual perspectives that I hope you may find useful. So I'm looking just from someone to give me a thumbs up. Can you see my screen? Anyone? Okay, thank you, Dr. Reverend Victoria. I just needed one. All right, so I want to start with this phrase right here from Dr. Ron Hobson. I had the good fortune of attending a conference, and he started with this powerful quote: "We are not broken. We are misled in thinking we are born with a curse instead of a blessing." Just sit with that in terms of when we think about how different religious communities, faith communities, spiritual communities enter into this conversation and this topic of preventing sexual assault. When we're talking about sexuality, how are we looking at our bodies? Who is shaping us? Who has implanted the thoughts and views that we have? So just want to start there. Sometimes people say that religions are part of the problem. I believe that religions can be part of the solution when we're working in community and when we're all centered on the same values. And so one of the things I like to point out is just some different calls to prevent sexual abuse. So from Christianity, from the book of Isaiah, we have no longer will violence be heard in your land, nor ruin and destruction within your borders. Your will calls your walls salvation and your gates praise. So right there, we have something saying that we don't want violence in the land. That is all forms of violence. And then in speaking with some friends who walk the Lakota path, this is what I was offered from them, because I was pulling. I'm an interfaith minister, so it's important for me to get information from different perspectives, not just my own, not the own path that I follow. And so it says the 7th generation principle is based on the ancient Iroquois philosophy that the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future. So if we take seriously this call to prevent sexual abuse and create a movement of empowered, liberated, sacred sexuality, that is going to benefit us today and those who are coming in the future. And then the path that I walk, Ifa Orisha spirituality that originates from Yoruba culture in Southwest Nigeria. We have a concept called Iwa Pele, which is actually gentle character, but some people sometimes say good character. It says one is required to live according to the principle of Iwa Pele, gentle character, as well as Iwa Rere, which is good character. To become an honorable ancestor of the future, one must follow the Alashe, the codes of ancestral conduct. And what I highlighted is respect. Why the word respect? Because a lot of times in religious and spiritual communities, we hear of this word called sacred. Sacred can also be tied to the word venerable, which means that each and every one of us is worthy of respect. So respect is very important. Respect for our bodies, which means that we should live in a world that is free of violence. Now, when we moved to a safe spiritual community, I had the good fortune of being a part of a safe church faith community training with the awesome organization Connect that used to be under the direction of the Reverend Dr. Sally McNichol. I tweaked this definition to make it more interfaith and inclusive of people from different backgrounds. And it says a spiritual religious community that provides for the protection of the physical, emotional, and spiritual health and well-being of each person. More than simply offering protection from a danger, a safe spiritual or religious community sees itself as a sanctuary where one finds protection, security, support, guidance, and the presence of divine grace. These are the kinds of spiritual communities that we need on board to be a part of the solution of preventing violence and all forms of intimate partner violence. If the community is not, does not meet this definition, it's probably not a community that's going to be effective in listening to members of the community who say that they are assaulted, especially if the sexual assault has happened within the community of itself. So we need to strive for becoming a safe spiritual or a safe religious community, and families for that matter too. As I'm moving along, I'm going to ask someone to be my timekeeper so that I don't go over and save time for my fellow panelists. As a therapist, one of the things that I like to look at is the conditioning of sexuality. So I take a whole sexuality narrative when my clients are working with me, but in general, if we're doing trainings and workshops, I ask everyone, and I'm asking you all now, think about these 3 things. Verbal programming. What were you told about sexuality and sexual abuse? What words did you hear or possibly read? The second, modeling. What things did you see people do? How did people express sexuality? What behavior was that? How did people respond to sexual abuse when they learned that it happened within their family, within their communities? And then the third one, specific transformative incidents. These are the things that happen in our lives that shape us and make us different from before the particular event happened. What are the transformative incidents in your lives, positive, negative, or neutral, that shaped how you saw yourself as a sexual being? When we take inventory of this, we get a sense of what our narrative is, how we were conditioned, and who influenced us. So that's part of the teaching. One of the things that comes up often, even for people who are not survivors or secondary survivors, is shame. So I lift up Reverend Dr. Ron Hobson again. Same presentation, he talked about there are 3 pedestals to shame. When we talk about why can't we solve this problem? It's usually because there has been an encounter with an authority figure. It can be religious, spiritual, or not. The second is because of that encounter with that figure, we assume that we are a failure, that we have quote unquote sinned, that we are in error. And so then we anticipate some sort of negative judgment that leaves us feeling afraid. And so we close and go within ourselves. And then the last leg of that pedestal of shame theory that he presented to us probably almost 10 years ago now was that people hide and suppress their own liveliness because of what someone else did or projected onto them. So our work is to examine each of those steps with the people that we love in our lives. You don't have to be a therapist or even an educator. You can simply ask, well, is that person really the authority? Are you in error? How can we get you to come out of hiding to see that you are beautiful and you are sacred, regardless of what was done to you? And that is the work that I do in therapy. Walk people through that so that they can release that shame. Next, some spiritual effects of sexual abuse. People feeling abandoned, people stopping to believe in that higher fill in the blank, people feeling pressure to forgive, people feeling that the abuse that they suffered was punishment, that horrible narrative that the divine wants you to suffer, what I call bad theology, and then people having unexpressed anger and feeling like they don't have the right to own their anger when they do. So those are some of the spiritual effects. If we want to move to healing, what can we do to get to the side of healing? And again, someone keep me on my time here. So in the Christian tradition, lectio divina. Thank you, Patty. Lectio divina. This is a practice where you can select a particular scripture within Christianity or any other tradition, and you can read, meditate, pray, and contemplate over and over and over again on that. And it's a beautiful practice. Then again, speaking with my friends who walk the Lakota path, this has to be done within community. It has to be sanctioned. And hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, but I was told the Lawampi and the Inipi, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, ceremonies, because the Lawampi is a healing ceremony and the Inipi is a purification ritual that could be beneficial to survivors. And I was told this by a survivor of sexual assault who has participated in these ceremonies. And then last, the act of libation coming from my tradition. Many people do libations. That is a practice all over the world with water. You see me holding this water where you're pouring water and paying homage to those who have come before you. There is something about that act, particularly for those of us who are of the African diaspora, if we are descendants of people who have been colonized or enslaved. The act of calling forth the names of those ancestors and speaking them aloud and feeling that is an embodied practice that can give a person, a family or community, the encouragement to move forward, to go on. So these are just some of the things that I have found helpful for the communities and people that I work with, and especially when I receive the urging or call to bring spirituality into the work that I do, not only so that I could be integrated, but so that people and survivors and secondary survivors know that they have a right to claim spirituality for themselves that is liberating versus oppressive. And I will end my remarks there. And just there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but that's my contact information at the end. Thank you for your time. Looking forward to the other panelists and Q&A.
Thank you so much. Wow, I took notes. That was really good and interesting. And when you mentioned the Inipi, that reminded me, so my friend Tate Walker is Lakota, living in Arizona. They wrote this great book that I'm just putting in the chat. They're a poet. And the book is called Trickster Riots. And I put it in there because there's a poem in there that talks about the Inipi ceremony. It's called From Tisanwi with Love. And in that, they write about the first gift of Tisanwi, the white buffalo calf woman. The story is that when she came on this earth, so she didn't have any clothes on, and somebody looked at her with impure thoughts, and she vaporized them. And everybody likes that story because she vaporized the bad guy. But that's not her first lesson. That's not why Tisanwi came. Tisanwi's first gift, which is what you're talking about, is the gift to show respect to each other. That was her first teaching, that and that was, she was being met with disrespect. And so she responded. And this poem, you can find it in Tate's book, The Trickster Riots. It's called From Tisanwi with Love. And there's this wonderful line in there where they're getting some teachings from the lodge director, and he's telling men that, you're not supposed to rape women. And my friend Tate reflects, this was the first time they had ever heard one man tell another not to rape a woman. And so, yeah, I loved your inclusion of Lakota and kind of tying that in. That got me right in my heart and made me think of Tate. Anyway, so now we will go to Maureen. Maureen is responsible for development and oversight of Safe Horizons criminal justice programs with a staff of more than 200 co-located in family court, criminal court, family justice center, and precinct locations citywide. She has worked for more than 35 years in the field of victimization and has extensive knowledge of victims' rights within the criminal justice and housing systems. Maureen assisted victims of September 11th that included trauma-informed supportive services and helping victims navigate various government systems to secure their rights, which is quite a feat. Those systems can be very Byzantine. Maureen provides training for Safe Horizons staff and other community-based organizations on assorted topics such as housing, criminal justice response, and assessing risk through a client-centered lens. Maureen was instrumental in the launch of the agency's client-centered practice and helped create and provide training for staff. Lastly, Maureen was a facilitator and instructor for the Safe Horizon Domestic Violence Accountability Program and helped create the curriculum that was used to educate participants about domestic violence and its impact on survivors and children. Maureen is a licensed social worker and holds a master's in public health. Take it away, Maureen.
Thank you, Patty. Hi, everybody. Let me start my timer so I know I don't go over. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here with my esteemed colleagues. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about sexual violence with elders. So sexual violence in any form, with any person, whether it's a young person, particularly in intimate partner violence, is often underreported. And we see that even more with elders. The types of relationships that could present with elders where there's sexual violence. It could be intimate partner violence. It could be a family member, a son, a grandson, granddaughter, daughter. It could be a caretaker. I think what Reverend Victoria mentioned earlier about it being a loved one is so true. It's often a loved one. We think of sexual violence and we think of what is often referred to as a predator, and it's a person that loves that individual. It could be a neighbor or a friend, and it could be somebody living in a facility, so living in a nursing home, and they're sexually abused by a worker in that nursing home. In fact, just personally, one of my aunts who was in a nursing home was not able to speak, and she was sexually abused by one of the workers in the nursing home and was afraid to say something to her sons, my cousins, because she was afraid of what would happen. So it can happen anywhere. I want to give you some stats. So as Patty mentioned, I oversee the criminal justice programs, and that's close to 200 staff working throughout New York City in courts and family justice centers and police precincts citywide. In calendar year 24, we worked with, we provided services for almost 7,000 elders. These are elders 60 or older who reported or came forward that they were a victim of some type of abuse or crime. Of these almost 7,000 elders, 65 reported some type of sexual violence. What does that say? What is that telling us? Is that telling us that it's not a real issue with elders? Because that's what a lot of people will think, that sexual violence is not a real issue with elders. But what it says to me and to others is that it's underreported. That because many of these, because of where these numbers are coming from, they've either reported to the police or somebody is coming into family court to seek an order of protection, or there's a criminal court case. I believe it's also saying that it's more prevalent than what is being reported. And it's also not being tracked properly. So this is just the criminal justice system. We know that there are survivors who may be coming forward and may not report, or may come forward and they're not believed. Just a couple of weeks ago, a woman came into our offices and she was 75 years old, and she was telling me that her neighbor was sexually abusing her. And what he was doing was recruiting women who would twerk in front of her, which she was really upset about. And when she reported to the police, they did not write it up as any type of sexual harassment or sexual abuse. They wrote it up as harassment. So I think that that is something that happens often. One of the things I want to point out about sexual violence in relationships is that in intimate partner violence, it is an indicator of future risk of domestic violence homicide. So it really is important that we be aware and listen for the cues, which I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes, when we are working with or talking with an elder. And that doesn't mean that's not just, a domestic violence advocate. It could be anybody, because, what we also know is that a person may be more comfortable talking with another person or a loved one than they will be to speak to somebody who they feel is part of the system and could cause more harm in their lives. The other thing that we know is that those who are victims of sexual violence and other types of violence, they describe the sexual violence as the most traumatic of all the abuses that are perpetrated against them. And this applies to elders as well. So why is it underreported? I think probably the main reason is shame. Coming forward and talking about, for an elder to come forward and talk about, particularly when it's a family member who has abused them. It could be, as I said, we know that it's children, grandchildren, sometimes it's siblings, sometimes it's an intimate partner. There's that shame that why did they believe, why did they let this happen to them? They don't see what's happening to them as abuse, as sexual abuse. That woman who came forward just a couple of weeks ago to talk about the women twerking in front of her. It wasn't until she and I started talking and we talked about how that was making her feel that she began to see that as sexual abuse. And when she reported to the police, they didn't see it as sexual abuse. They labeled it as harassment. They're not believed. I think that we see this even more often in elders. What do you mean, somebody touched you in that way? It's hard to, people don't want to believe that a person who's older can be sexually abused by another person, particularly if that other person is somebody that is a family member, a loved one, or somebody who's taking care of them. Because we also know that, that there are caretakers that abuse elders as well, sexually abuse elders as well. I think the other thing that's really true and sometimes also hard for people to understand is that they don't want harm to come to the person that is abusing them. They want it to stop, but they don't want that person to get in trouble. And if they feel that by reporting it, that person will get arrested or that they'll be put out of the home, and particularly if this person is taking care of the elder, it can make it that much harder for the elder to come forward and talk about the sexual violence that is happening in the home. Survivors and elders are blamed. I've been doing this work for almost 40 years. And with all of the changes that have happened over the years, one of the things that still commonly happens is survivors getting blamed for the abuse that they are living through. And that is even more prevalent with elders, that they are blamed. And that leads to them then blaming themselves. So they blame themselves for what is happening to them. And then, of course, with elders, there could be physical or mental disabilities. There could be dementia. And that also can lead to the person not being able to come forward to talk about what is happening to them. Or if they do come forward, some people may think that it's part of their dementia or their disability and that it can't really be happening. Because I think as a society, we don't want to accept that an elder we don't want to accept an elder being abused in any way, but definitely sexually abused. So what can we do when we know that a person is being abused, or we suspect it, or maybe we don't know, but there's different things that are happening in that with that elder. The first thing is listening for those cues. We created a workbook, if you will, for domestic violence advocates. This was many years ago with funding we had through NIJ. Because even in domestic violence relationships with, no matter what the age was, advocates were missing cues of sexual violence in the relationship. They were not hearing and following up in a client-centered way to ask follow-up questions if something was said. So, for example, if the survivor says, he refused to wear a condom. Follow-up question could be, well, what happens if he refuses to wear a condom? And that, could lead to a discussion where is it sexual violence or is it not? And I think that this is really even more important for elders. Being patient and really hearing what that person is saying, and knowing that the person may not be ready in that moment to disclose, and that it's even more important that we listen to what they're saying, that we don't label something as sexual abuse, but we, in a client-centered way, listen to what they are describing and mirror their language, which can be really important. And asking open-ended questions, because we want to explore and find out what is happening there, and know that this may not happen in one session. And it could also, I think that I was really happy to hear DeShannon say religion should be part of the solution, because this is so true. Every person, and particularly we know that so many elders and turn to their spiritual leaders before they turn anywhere else. So you can be that person. You don't have to be the expert in domestic violence. You don't have to be the expert in elder abuse, in sexual abuse, but you can be there to listen to that person, to help that person, and to make the connections. In the chat is the domestic violence hotline. Anybody can call that hotline. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. It could be the survivor themselves, or it could be somebody seeking services for that survivor. And it can be critical to help that person. And for us, we need to be, and when I'm saying us, I mean advocates, we need to be the experts and resources. We need to know what is out there, what can be, what services can that person utilize to help themselves, and what's not out there. Sadly, every day in this current political climate, we are hearing loss of funding, programs that are being shut down, and many of these programs are impacting agencies that help elders. And we need to fight back against that, because if I am working with an elder and that elder is in need of housing, and I know that there's no housing available, that's going to be problematic. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm sorry, I know I went over, but the last thing I'll say is the other thing we have to be okay with is that that elder may not want the person who is hurting them, who's sexually abusing them, out of their life. And we have to be okay with that. We can't just say that we're okay with that. We have to be okay with that, because if we're not, then we're not doing what that survivor wants to do. And this is something that is, new in the elder abuse field, where they are starting to look at in a more meaningful way, working with those who are causing harm to elders, including in sexual abuse situations. Thank you. I apologize I went over.
Thank you. I mean, you've given us a lot to think about. And one of the things, resource that I'm just going to highlight, and I'm going to see if I can find it and put it in the chat, is Mariam Kaba is doing a lot of really good work on transformative justice, which is different from restorative justice. Transformative justice works with the perpetrator as well. Because we know that these things are not reported. If they are reported, they're not believed. And, if they are believed, chances are they don't go to, they don't go into what Mariam Kaba calls rape factories anyway. They don't go to the prison anyway. So we're already living in a world where, rapists are walking free. That's what abolitionists are always accused of. What kind of, do we want that world? The fact is, they are part of our lives, the people who are abusive and harmful. So what if we imagined something better? And I really loved DeShannon bringing in how a book transformed her life and got her on a new path, because books really can change us. We have to imagine a better world. This one is not working very well for most of us. And in imagining that better world, I can't think of a better person to throw to than DeManuel. DeManuel is the coordinator of youth initiatives at A Call to Men, a national violence prevention organization committed to promoting healthy, respectful manhood and preventing gender-based violence. In his role, he guides young people and youth-facing adults in challenging harmful gender norms and embracing authenticity to help create a world where men and boys are loving and respectful, and where women and girls and those in the margins of the margins are valued and safe. As a licensed marriage and family therapist with over a decade of experience, DeManuel has led mental health and healthy youth development programs with a trauma-informed lens to promote holistic well-being and equity. He lives in Jersey City with his dog Brody and enjoys traveling, beach days, and putting a plant-based twist on his favorite recipes. And I'm assuming that's not a bean in your Caesar. It might be. I don't know.
You're right about that. You're right about that. Thank you so much, Patty. Good afternoon or good evening, actually, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I'm so honored and humbled to be here today and to really join the rest of our panel to talk about such an important conversation and just sharing with you all how we engage young people in our work, especially with promoting healthy manhood and how it has a really deep connection to preventing sexual assault. And so first, I really want to say that while we know that men are the perpetrators of sexual assault and sexual violence, we know that we are also a part of the solution, right? And so we're a critical part of the solution. And as an intentional or international violence prevention organization, we really step into every space and share that is an invitation to men to have a conversation, to sit down and listen to these things. It's not an indictment, right? This is all about helping to create accountability and growth because we believe that healthy manhood is the solution to end sexual violence. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. And I really want to go ahead and lay the land out, right? And set the stage for what it is that we're working against when it comes to working with youth, especially boys and young men, and share how we are coming up against trying to really prevent sexual violence. And I want to share a little bit about the founders of A Call to Men and how they came into this work. Go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if I'm good, y'all. Thumbs up. Okay, beautiful. So yeah, our founders, Tony Porter and Ted Bunch, they were in New York City doing a lot of work working with men around sexual violence and domestic violence. And from that, they saw the really deep need to go ahead and create a call to men so that we can be a part of that solution. And with that, they coined this term called the man box, which is the collective socialization of boys and men, and is made up of all the rigid and traditional expectations, the rules, things that society tells and places on boys and men of what it means to be a man, how to be masculine, and how to step into your manhood. I'll go in deeper into the man box later, but I want to just also share again something that we created called the Live Respect curriculum and how that really shined a light into the importance of having these conversations with boys, especially, when we're talking about the youth, what does it mean to have these life skills and what does it mean to be a well-meaning person and tap back into your humanity? And this curriculum was created in partnership with Scholastic and provides youth-facing adults the tools that they need to really help build young people's character. Because I want to share that this curriculum is for all genders as well. We know different ways that the man box has an impact on women and girls and those who are non-binary, and we can discuss how that plays a role in their ways of healthy and promoting healthy manhood. And so we did a survey, right? We did a survey with 300 boys that were doing the Live Respect program. And one critical thing that we saw is that boys don't understand consent. They were open and honest about this. Only 19% of those 300 boys said that they understood what consent really is. So just let that sit in and just have an understanding of what does that mean for sexual assault, sexual violence, and how they're coming into interactions and in their relationships. And they were talking about that they were taught to have lesser value, that women have lesser value than them, and that the man box exists. Again, those rules and traditions that society says for how men and boys are supposed to act and behave. They're saying 68% of them actually realize that it exists and it impacts them. And after the man box or after the Live Respect curriculum, we were able to see that, here we go, 75% actually understood consent, right? So I'm really highlighting this to show that it's so important to just sit down and have these conversations with the boys that are in your lives. And you can see that even 75%, 74% found out that, yeah, we were taught that women do have less value than us. And 99% that they can understand that the man box exists and it has an impact on them. So just look at those numbers one more time, y'all. 19%, 16%, 68% to 75, 74, and 99. So when we're looking at this again, it's just all about the importance of having these conversations, And this is not a sales pitch because the curriculum is free for you to download. And it really just, again, talks about ways that you can implement this in different, maybe it's your counseling groups, in classrooms, or just even in mentor programs, or how to have these conversations in your everyday life with the boys that are in your life. And so while again, we know the importance and the facts of being in spaces of working with young men and boys who have committed sexual violence, again, our approach is really to engage everyone, right? So we're especially interested in engaging those who haven't committed any acts of harm or crime. We know that if we sit down and we look at this as the entire population of the world, this many people are those who are going to be creating or having that harm, right? Causing harm and sexual violence and domestic violence. But what are we doing with this other half? Or not even this other half, I'm sorry, with this other large population? And what does that mean for us to really encourage them to make sure that they're speaking up, right? They're speaking up and they're highlighting things that they're seeing, right? This might be a joke, a comment, something in the locker room, in the classroom, or even online, because we know silence is complicity and we don't want that. So if that's like the normal behavior that's really going on within their schools, how are they really going to be able to make a real difference in the lives of those who they're interacting with on a regular basis? And so I want to talk about this thing called the man box that I shared with you earlier, right? The man box is something that, again, is all the things that make up what it means to be a man. When you're looking at this, you're seeing be tough, boys don't cry, don't show any emotions, don't show any weakness. You have to be aggressive. But if you can in the chat, go ahead and drop in. At what age do you really think that men or boys are taught this, right? At what age do you think or have you heard people saying this type of stuff to boys? And again, that collective socialization of what it means to be a man has been passed down from generation to generation. Whether it was intentional or not intentional, again, this is an invitation for you to really sit back and think of how you were taught and having them come to the realization of how impactful that has on their relationships, how they think, and how they behave with each other. And if you're looking at the man box rules, you're seeing all those things over there are really things that are associated with being a woman or being feminine. Don't act like a woman. Don't be vulnerable. Don't be too loving, and don't be too caring. Don't be too nice or kind. And what does that really do for boys? And like, how does that really show up in their everyday life in the ways that they're also internalizing who they are as a person? And so some of you might be looking at this, and I know I have myself, and seeing these things that have popped up in my everyday life or in my childhood or within my own family, my culture, and religion. And so some of these things that we're saying is there is a really good important part for doing this work as an advocate or whichever role that you do play in the lives of young adults and boys. And it's all about taking inventory and reflecting on what you have been taught, right? And then what are you passing down to the youth in your lives? And regardless of your gender identity or your race, your religion, your age, we all uphold parts of the man box, and just talking about the ways that we expect male identified partners to show up, family members and friends, or even strangers to show up in certain situations. And that could be indirect or like really direct, right? Especially when we're talking about what it means for our everyday lives and just rolling off the tongue and just being our authentic selves. And again, this is stuff that has been so ingrained with us for so long that we're kind of blind to it. So when we're thinking about how to promote healthy manhood, we got to sit back and do a lot of inventory. So I'm going to go ahead and give us a character, right? Give us a character. What does this really look like for us in everyday life or just on TV, right? So there's this episode, this show called Adolescence on Netflix. This is not a plug. I'm just going to use this name, Jamie. He was a character who was arrested for committing a violent crime against a girl within his school. And I think it's very fitting to this because there's a lot of through line with what we're speaking about tonight and the actions that happen within the show. And so Jamie, let's say he's 5 years old and he's going to get a medical vaccine from his doctor. And he's there with his dad, his uncle, his older brother, whoever that may be. And while he's getting that shot, he's reacting, right? It hurts. You're like 5 years old. Of course it's going to hurt. And then you start to cry. Jamie starts to cry and he starts to tear up. But he's told, hey, you got to be a big boy, right? You have to man up. You have to be tough. What is he being taught in those moments? He's taught that he has to be suppressing his emotions, that he can't show any signs of weakness. And then let's say a little bit older, Jamie's growing up a bit and he's playing a game of catch in the yard with his dad. And he throws the ball to his dad as hard as he can, but his dad doesn't think it was hard enough. So he says, "Oh, come on, son. You got to throw harder than that. You're throwing like a 99% sure you all thought or even said out loud, throws like a girl." So pause and think, what does that really mean for Jamie in that moment? How do you think he's feeling? What do you think he starts to believe about himself? And what do you think that he starts to believe about girls? And I think we can go back to that man box and you can see some of those things. Hey, weakness, right? And so when we're really talking about this, we want to make sure that we are realizing that these beliefs are being reinforced also within the media and social media, especially with so many influencers talking about what it means to be a man. And that's something that we're also combating and we have to really hone in on and try to shed a light on and also just come together as a village, right? Utilizing our resources and folks that we are in community with to make sure that we're modeling healthy manhood and practicing healthy manhood. And one of those impacts of what it means to be a man in this man box is distancing, right? You're seeing all these words. Again, these are words that are from the man box and statements from the man box that are characterizing what it means to be a man. And they start to create distance from boys and men, from girls and women. And they're taught, again, not to show these emotions and not to be tough. And from that, if we're going to look at Jamie again and Jamie's dad, even though he might have been in that moment with the doctor and saying like, hey, I got to show my son that he's being supported, right? I don't want him to be in pain. So he's going to tell him to man up and not to show his emotions. But that's having a negative impact on him in the way that he's seeing the world and how he's seeing how his relationship with girls are. And the same thing with he throws like a girl. That's something else that's having a negative impact on his views of what it means to be a girl. And is really reinforcing, hey, don't cry, meaning don't be your authentic self. And being a man means you're distancing yourself from those experiences and the lack of interest in the experience of girls and women, and how that really does have an impact on, again, being your authentic self. And what is the experience of girls and women, and how do my actions have an impact on them? It kind of takes away from their humanity because, again, you're seeing don't be too caring, don't ask for help, you're not supposed to show feelings. And this is life outside the man box, right? When we're talking about the man box, we're really looking at all those negative things. And what's really holding the man box together, what's cementing it is within our culture. And it's all about fear, right? When you're looking at these words or these statements, you're seeing a lot of things that are again associated with being a girl, being a gay man, being sensitive, vulnerable, weak, showing emotions, soft, and having to man up. And there's consequences, right? There's consequences, whether that's verbal or physical assault from your peers or bullies in your life, talking about what does that really mean, right? And so when we're thinking about it, as boys are getting older and older, of course, Jamie's supposed to be interested now in dating, whether that's a man or maybe that's a girl or a boy, what have you. We know that when Jamie's going on a date with one of his, peers that he's interested in dating, or maybe that he already is dating, and he goes back to his male friends, they're not going to ask him how was the movie at all. They're going to start asking him, hey, did you get some? Were you intimate? And then if he says no, hey, I was really just interested in, getting to know her, he's going to be bullied. He's going to be bullied. He might be called gay. And of course, that's something that's seen as negative, which shouldn't be seen as negative. He's going to be called a lot of different names that are also associated with the girl. And hey, that can also lead to Jamie like, okay, well, if society is telling me this, if my family's telling me this, if my friends are telling me that I should be getting with the girl, he has to start acting on some of those expectations. And with those pressures and not having a clear understanding of what consent is, that could then lead to sexual assault. And so with all those things that we discussed or that I discussed and that I shared, we come down to this equation that we talk about at A Call to Men, where men and boys are now seeing women as lesser value. They're seen as being property and especially sexual objects for men and boys, and that leads to the violence against women. So this equates to having power over, devaluing, and then again, leading to this idea of violence against women. And so we call this the foundation, right? The collective socialization of manhood. And when you're looking at this, please know that this is not like a hierarchy or ranking of these issues, but we really want you to pay attention to that foundational piece, right? The collective socialization of men. And we want to address that collective socialization so we can really begin to reduce and end those violence with those pillars above. You're seeing the violence against women, domestic violence, sexual assault, rape, stalking, dating violence, harassment, and porn. And when we're talking about pornography, we're really talking about that violent pornography that boys are seeing, and how if that continues to be going unchecked, that they're going to continue to consume this violent behavior or this violent intimacy and objectifying and dehumanizing those different forms of intimacy. And that's really shaping the expectations of boys and how they're supposed to be in relationship to girls or whoever that they choose as their partner. And when we're looking at this, it can give boys the belief that girls and women are really there just for their pleasure, that only their body parts really matter, not their spirits, not their souls, not their interests, and not their experiences. And we know how harmful that can be. And I'm sorry that I'm going so fast. I just know that we're coming up on time. So please excuse me there. And so our real goal, again, is to help promote healthy manhood. And we like to show this slide just as a way to give people some takeaways for how you can do that. So when we're talking about ending sexual assault and violence, we really do believe that healthy manhood is the solution, and that we have to help boys and young men reconnect their heads to their hearts, and then reconnect to humanity as well, their humanity for themselves and their humanity for others. And so if we continue to really increase healthy and respectful manhood by teaching and leading by example, we really do start to shift what it means to decrease the violence against others. Please feel free to take a screenshot of this. Take a picture with your phone, right? Take away some of these, share them with your friends, share them with your family members. And I will also challenge you, hey, what's one thing that I can do that's on this that I have been doing, or maybe that I need to really start thinking about and reevaluating, right? Maybe challenge somebody to come along the journey to do a 12-month, 12 keys of practicing healthy manhood. This first month, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start embracing and expressing a full range of emotions and talk about that with each other. Validate each other's feelings for other than boys and men, for other boys and men, excuse me. And so didn't want to leave you all here without sharing this QR code for the Live Respect curriculum. If you want to, go ahead and take a picture, take a screenshot again. 100% free. It's a guide. It comes with a curriculum guide and a program guide to just help you follow along with what does this mean to have these conversations. And didn't get a chance to, didn't think I would be able to, but we're in a loneliness pandemic as well. We know COVID-19 had a real hard effect on everybody when it comes to isolation. And then talking about the dating world and what does that mean in this digital world of rejection. So that's also having a negative impact on the way that boys and men are reacting and responding to not getting what they want and what they deserve, right? Thinking of what they're entitled to. And how that may then lead to violence against women and girls and just anyone, those and even in the margins of the margins. And that's a community conversation that we did in partnership with Match Group that you can find on our website. You can listen in, and there's also more tools on our website. And last but not least, just some words from our CEO and co-founder, Tony Porter. This is a TED Talk that I think really just paints a really clear picture and can really start some of that dialogue and conversation. And that's all for me. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Back to you, Patty. Sorry, Patty, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, I just didn't want everybody hearing my coughing while I was listening. Yeah, I really appreciated hearing about the upstream work that you're doing, in terms of, it gets described as a game of dodgeball, right? We spend so much time teaching women and non-gender conforming people how to avoid being hit by the ball or repairing the damage of being hit by one. And this is what launched me on my own social work career was, what if we just taught the men to stop throwing the damn thing? What if we just did that? So I want to start this kind of question, with this question and go back to DeShannon. In terms of the upstream work, where how do you see that in your practice or in your community? What that upstream work could look like? With people who are, because often too our victims are also people who are perpetrating harm. So how do you see that upstream work in your own work?
Thanks for the question, Patty. For me, it would start with what I was speaking about, sexuality, because when I entered this field and started studying and, doing internships and all of that, sexuality was left out of the conversation. So some of the work that D'Emmanuel's talking about, that conditioning with boys that starts early, disrupting that to me is what changes it. And in particularly, if you have communities where religion is very salient and very important, looking in the religious narratives and spiritual narratives of specific communities and seeing what is affirming of sexuality and what is not. I think I know body phobic philosophies, body phobic theologies, body shaming theologies actually help put seeds in the soil to make conditions for sexual abuse to thrive. So part of disrupting that is looking at different narratives, different teachings that promote a holistic way to look at self and a holistic way to look at sexuality, and also definitely teaching vulnerable communities the importance of using their voice. In those communities who have more access to power, those parts of our population, teaching them how to handle and use power in a different way. I have a nephew, a 14-year-old nephew, and I'm watching the conditioning. And I'm thinking like, okay, I'm his aunt, and I'm going to teach him all of these things. And even with the seeds that I have planted, the societal impact on him is huge. And I've already caught things in language that my nephew says that are problematic. And so sometimes what we have to do is when we're around young people or even our peers is to lovingly question and challenge and offer a different perspective and a way to look at things, because I don't think that many people are aware of some of the actions that we do and the words that we speak, of how suppressive and oppressive that is to each other. So that's how I do that upstream work, really starting with sexuality and looking at the body and what are the messages that we have that open us up and make us feel more alive, and what are those messages that are having us isolate and shame.
I really like that, kind of going into their own worldview,
Yes.
to find the cues and the clues that you can use to say, well, you know what, you already believe this. So let's build on that. Let's draw on that. That's very strength-based. Let's start with what's working and we'll do more of that. And if we do more of that, we'll have less time for that other stuff that's not working. Yeah, so I really appreciate that. And I did actually put the title of that book, Push. I'm going to have to go find it into the chat so that people can find that. The idea of books changing our lives and transforming us is just so close to my heart, because it can, especially when we do it in conversation with others and we don't just read by ourselves, but when we allow the books to kind of transform us together. And I love the path that it's launched you on. Maureen, where do you see this kind of upstream work, the preventative or transformative work happening in your practice?
I think that it's looking at other ways of, what I mentioned earlier about, survivors and elders who don't want harm, don't want to be involved in the criminal justice system, don't want their person arrested, don't want an order of protection. They want that person to get help. They want the violence to end, but they want that person to get help. And that is something that was never looked at and embraced in this movement at all. And it's only recently now that they're looking at restorative, transformative justice in responding to domestic violence and sexual violence. And, and survivors have said that it works for them, that it really helps them to heal. And they believe that the person who hurt them can also heal as well. I think the other thing that what I would like to see is I think we demonize those who are perpetrating sexual violence crimes. And look at people that come out of, prison or jail for sexual violence, and they go on a sex registry. And sometimes, they could be on that for life, and that could prevent them from housing, could prevent them from getting a job. And, why do we treat that person differently than somebody who committed a homicide? And not to say that we should not hold a person accountable for what they have done, but is the accountability too much? And that hurts families, where a family may not be able to reunite because of where they live, and that person can't come back into the home because they're on, a sex registry and they live too close to a school. And so I think that, and that is probably somewhat controversial, but I think that it's something that we should look at. We should look at how we view, those who cause sexual violence, harm, and are we being really unfair to them when they have been held accountable and may have changed their lives and should be given a second chance and should not be defined by what they did, but the person that they are.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, you talking about, the families who maybe they don't want that person to be completely out because they may rely on that person financially, and then what happens to them? And I was reminded recently that when we talk about demonizing people in Christian theology, the demons, of course, are the people the angels who fell from heaven, right? They're beyond redemption. And so when we demonize people, that's what we're doing. We're putting them beyond redemption. And it's very interesting to me that so much abolition work and this transformative justice work came largely out of Black communities, because their men are not disposable, right? We're talking about small, often isolated, communities. Their neighborhoods. There's not a lot of resources. They're deliberately underfunded, and so they developed these transformative justice models and abolitionist models, ways of holding wrongdoers accountable, because transformative justice and abolition are not about, a free-for-all where nobody's held accountable. It is about holding wrongdoers accountable, but not in a way that puts them beyond redemption, which is what you're talking about. Because yes, people are not disposable, and and we need accountability is not the same as punishment, right? We can punish people and they're still not accountable. They haven't learned anything. And if we're cutting them off from all other ways of being human, right? Like you say, housing, jobs, all those other things. If we're cutting them off from all those other ways of being human, what are they left with? They have so few. So I really appreciate you bringing that up and then doing that work of listening to the victim. What does the victim of any age actually want in this moment, and how can I keep them safe in that? So I really appreciate you bringing that. So I'm mindful that we're kind of coming up on 8:30, and people have other lives to get to. So I did have one more question, and it's the magic wand question that I'm going to throw to everybody. What does your community need? And we'll start with Deshawn, or Demanuel. Sorry, we'll start with Demanuel. What does your community need for people to be safe, for people to thrive, for there to be a community free from sexual violence? What does your community need? And then DeShannon, and then Maureen.
Yeah, there's many things on my list, but
It's the magic wand question. So whatever's on your list.
the first thing I'll speak to is the one thing I'll speak to is something that we've been speaking about a lot in our organization, is that I'll go back to social media influencers. If we're talking about the youth and how they're like ingesting all of this information, a lot of the influencers are the ones with the megaphones, and they're getting the most attention, and they're spewing what it means to be unhealthy as a man and that unhealthy manhood and masculinity. And so we just need more outspoken people to talk about what does healthy manhood really look like. What does it really mean to tap back into your humanity and seeing the humanity in others, so that sexual violence is even on their radar to be an act to commit.
It's a short list.
Listen, I said I was going to keep it quick and short for y'all. I know we're coming up on time, and I probably went over.
All right. Well, if we have time, we'll circle back to you to see if you have anything else on your list. DeShannon, what does your community need to feel safe and be free from sexual violence?
So interesting because I am in an intersection of a few communities. So I'm just going to make it simple and say we need spaces where we can, intergenerational spaces, where we can speak openly and freely about what's going on within our families and communities. And we need intergenerational education and healing spaces. So if we have that, then that would be able to disrupt some of the shame. We also need spiritual and religious, culturally competent spaces, because there's a lot of things that people carry that are biases, particularly toward people who walk different indigenous spiritual paths and African traditional indigenous religions as well. So we need spaces where people come in with that sort of sensitivity, where they won't come in with bias and people can express themselves and what they've endured and be supported.
Okay. Maureen, what does your community need to feel safe and be free from sexual violence?
I think a few things. I think we need to really listen to survivors, whether it's a child, a young adult, an elder. And we need to believe survivors. You know, we have to start doubting and thinking we know everything. And I say this as an advocate, that early on in my career, I was not client-centered. I told clients what to do, thinking that, you know, my way was the best way, which at that time was, you know, calling the police, getting an order of protection. And I know that, you know, that does not work for many survivors. More preventative programs like A Call to Men that are reaching, you know, young people, and that are doing it in a real community-based way, no matter, you know, whatever the community is. And then more services in the community. We need to move away from, you know, the criminal justice system. And I say that as somebody who has been working in the criminal justice system my whole career. But we need to move away from it, and we need to invest money, and, you know, and this is what we do. We say we're going to do it, but we don't put enough funding into these services that we need in so many ways. But if we have that with communities, we'll see a real difference, and start, you know, if these services start very young. And they don't have to be services targeted towards victims. They could be just services in the community to help that community thrive. And, you know, because the survivors turn to their community, they turn to their, you know, spiritual leaders, they turn to their family, they turn to their friends. I remember years ago when New York City did a street question where they went out and said, if you were a victim of domestic violence, who would you turn to? And, you know, they didn't even say advocates. They said they would turn to their family, number one, family and friends, and spiritual leaders, you know. And I don't think it's changed much since that happened 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is who people turn to, and to DeShannon's point, they need to be competent in the work that they're doing. Because I think we all know pastors who have told women to go home and be more submissive. I remember at 12 years old, a pastor telling my aunt that. I remember being 12 at the time and thinking, what's wrong with him? Why would he tell her that? And I was 12, you know, and I'm 59 now. So that tells you a little bit about when I was 12. You know, so yes, investment in our communities, investment in community spaces. That makes me think of, you know, Indigenous friendship centers and urban Indian centers. I think they're mostly called in the US. Whereas Indigenous people, we have a place to go, and they're often, you know, they're not always great places either, you know, because we don't talk about this stuff in a good way. We don't always deal with this stuff in a good way. But I know our friendship center for a while had a men's only night where there were no other programs happening in the center at that time, because a lot of the men who were coming to this program had conditions that prevented them from being able to be in a building with women and children in it. And so if there were other, programs happening at the same time, then these men couldn't participate in the programs that they were court ordered to participate in because it would put them in violation of their, of their conditions. And so the center actually said, okay, you know what? I forget what night it was, but it was one night per week, the only program going on in the building. And it wasn't available for rent. You couldn't rent the rooms, nothing. The only program available in the building was that. But also, how isolating is that? So it's one way to get around that, but also profoundly isolating. To this beautiful list of things our communities need, I would add housing and walkable communities and meaningful access to medical care and all of those things, which I think, Maureen, you were getting at in investment in our community. D'Emmanuel, did you have anything you wanted to add to your list? Because you only had one thing, and these women had quite a shopping list of very good things, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me add to my shopping list, just in the sake of time again, because I want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. Thinking again, and not to double back on anything anyone said, just a matter of role models, right? Of men and women and everyone really doing an inventory and what you're doing and how the impact that you've had on the people of your life, right? Talking about that vulnerability, talking about really getting some therapy. Sometimes there really needs to be therapy in order to break those generational patterns. And in order to do that, we really need to be able to step outside of ourselves and see the impact that we're having on each other. So I really just hope for more mentors in different spaces and more people being role models in so many avenues, even talking about what it means to be a principal, right? Being a principal in a school and how you create that culture and climate, and being a superintendent in the school district. And what does that mean for you and the resources that you're bringing in? So really all about that community building and that self-work, that inventory for yourself.
Well, and that ends us right where DeShannon started us with, that willingness to examine ourselves and examine the things that we assume to be true. We have to be willing to do that. And I think we've all kind of talked about that in different ways, our willingness to examine ourselves. Maureen talked about that just in that when you said that about not being client-centered. Yes, my first probably 5-6 years of child welfare was not client-centered at all. I knew what was wrong with these families. I knew how we were going to fix them. I knew the things that they needed to do. And even though I might have been 100% correct, if these goals did not come from these families, then they were not going to do them. And they were meaningless for them because I was not addressing the issues that were important to them. I was addressing the things that mattered to me. And that's what I'm hearing from all of you, is that if we're going to break these cycles, that 7 generations of trauma, we got to reach into those 7 generations of resilience as well and be willing to examine ourselves. What are we pulling forward? And then what are we modeling and role modeling out into the community? I don't know, do we have any questions? I know it's 8:30 already, but okay, we do have one question. So in your view, what role can collaboration between civil society organizations and faith-based institutions, so these two kind of civil secular things and faith-based things, play in raising public relations about gender-based violence and control? So I think the question is asking, how can our two secular civic-based organizations and faith-based organizations work together? So just kind of quickly, we'll start with DeShannon. How do you see those two working together?
Well, they have worked together before. Give the example of Connect in New York City when Rev. Sally McNichol was a part of that. They received funding from the city, and actually we received, because I was working with them, we received a grant, I believe, from Ms. Foundation. And so Ms. Foundation was awarding different organizations across the country, and they awarded Connect. They also awarded, I believe it was Linda Crockett in Pennsylvania, who actually had a training specific for churches, for the Christian community, for people who wanted to come and be more educated so that they could be a place to provide accurate information and also appropriate referral. So I think that if people have the heart and are willing, that it can happen. You just have to make sure that the values are aligned, because there could be some faith-based religious spiritual organizations who, in my opinion, have some very damaging sexuality narratives, very victim blaming and very shaming. Some institutions with those types of philosophies may not have the same values as a nonprofit or a secular organization, but hopefully there's some way that if people could find the values where they can meet in the middle, you can also refer. You know, every religious and spiritual organization should have a list of therapists that they can refer people to, nonprofits, legal resources where they can refer out that are reputable. I think that's where the marriage comes. And I've seen successful ones and not so successful ones.
Maureen, any thoughts on that?
I would just add exactly what we're doing here tonight, you know, where we're bringing together the communities and we're educating, you know, the best collaborations I've seen is where you get to know one another, you meet regularly, you know, share your ideology, your resources, your thinking about this area, and I think that this can really lead to meaningful change, you know, and but there's got to be an investment on both parts. But I really think that has so much power. I've sat on various you know, high-risk teams, and you know, it's only recently in the past 10 years that they've really started involving more community members, faith-based community members, and I think that, you know, that should have been happening 30 years ago, but it's happening, and you know, we need to do more of it.
That's good. And Emmanuel?
Yeah, I'm dittoing and double clicking on everything you both shared. And just want to add that it comes with a real intentional relationship building, right? You really have to have an intentional relationship and being open and vulnerable with each other about what you're seeing on both sides of the fence. And really talking about how can we bring everybody along that journey and not leaving anyone behind. I think it's just so important to make sure that you're having some real tough conversations about what's happening within the community and what's happening within these different organizations too.
Yeah, for sure. And the only thing that I would add to all of that is a recognition of power imbalance. That that in some places there's a real power imbalance. There's rarely do we come together on an equal footing, right? Somebody's got the money, somebody's got the ear of government, somebody's got in these conversations we have to be willing to reckon with the power imbalance, particularly because sexual violence is a crime of power. Right? It's a crime of power. And so in this in particular, we need to make sure that we're not replicating those same hierarchies of power in the partnerships that we're trying to forge. So thank you guys so much for your time, for your expertise, for the conversation. I took so many notes. I just also really appreciate my own invitation, you know, Victoria, and, you know, contacting me and inviting me to participate in this. Moderating panels is always one of my favorite things to do because I get to have a thought on everything. And I just get to learn from the most interesting people. So thank you, Victoria, so much for having me and the panel and all of y'all who showed up tonight and then stayed with us into overtime. Really appreciate everybody. So thank you. And Victoria has some last words for us.
Yes, and I want to start briefly by again thanking you, Patty. The power of words to heal and offer hope. To DeShannon, power to come together in community and respect and share and grow together instead of apart. Maureen, the power to be tenacious and dedicated and willing to change and grow and to offer hope of healing to so many people. Thank you. And Emmanuel, I think that the missing link for many years was not getting a proper male voice. And I don't mean proper, improper, I mean authentic voice. And your organization is doing a powerful job helping all of us come together as whatever genders and categories we want to do. I don't want to talk too much, but you all know, despite somebody's statement. There's more than two genders. I'm sorry, I have to put that in. But I want to say thank you, especially to the guests. This is powerful work to see that we can do this. We can do this together. And it's encouraging me that, yes, we better continue this conversation in the name of love and justice and kindness. So thank you for coming. I want to share as a closing word a benediction, which is attributed to Swiss Henry Frederick Amiel. Some of you have heard it in your institutions of faith, or maybe you've just read it in the power of books. Life is short, and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who make the journey with us. So be swift to love and make haste to be kind. Good night. Peace and healing justice be with you.